Welcome on back, everyone. This is the All Aussie Rules Footy Podcast. This is episode 23, and this is our Round 9 review. Another week in the books. 9 matches this weekend. A couple went right down to the wire. A couple blowouts. And yeah, footy all round. Don't forget, as always, like, comment, and subscribe. Check out me on all my socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of the above. And you can find this podcast releasing on YouTube and Spotify every Monday and Wednesday. So tonight's episode, we're going to have a look at the latest news. We'll have a look at how my tips went on the weekend. And then we'll review every game that was played across the 4 days. So we'll get into it. Latest news. Nothing too major. A couple controversial umpiring decisions on Friday night. Couple tough games. There was a draw. I don't think anything too major's happened. Jeremy Cameron, obviously, whole concussion thing was a bit of a story, but the AFL are happy with how that was handled. Outside of that, I don't think there's anything too major other than announcing that Essendon are in the top 4 at the moment and should be for the next probably 4 or 5 weeks at a minimum. So they're flying. Some teams starting to get going, other teams maybe falling apart a little bit. We'll get cracking into it. First up, we'll have a look at my tips for the weekend. We got Carlton right on Thursday night, so we're off to a cracking start. Life was good. That was followed up by Geelong going down to Port Adelaide, which was a bit disappointing for my tips at least. Where are we? Fremantle, they got beaten by Sydney. Hawthorn, they got up over St Kilda, so I got that wrong. Continuing my terrible streak when the Bombers got over the Giants, so that was 4 in a row wrong. Things turned around for me once the games got easier to tip. Gold Coast, comfortable winners over North Melbourne. Not too far off on the margin. Richmond obviously got absolutely smoked by the Bulldogs to the tune of 91 points. Collingwood comfortably beat West Coast. And in the final game, I said it was going to be close, and it was a draw. So we get a half mark, but we give it a tick in football tipping world. So 5 out of 9, not terrible, especially seeing I got 4 in a row wrong. 54 out of 81 for the season. Once again, not terrible. We'll keep plugging away, hopefully. We've had a couple good weeks before this week, so maybe we can re-get that form back up next week, maybe. So that's that. We'll have a look now at each and every match from the weekend. And Thursday night was where we kicked it off. It was Carlton v Melbourne at the MCG. Thursday night football. Both teams coming into this still in the top 8, but Carlton had a tough few weeks. They dropped down to 8th. Melbourne were cruising, they were 4th. Obviously beating Geelong the week before. And this game kind of looked like Carlton were going to run away with it. First quarter they kicked 5 goals to 0. And from that point, the game certainly evened up after that. It was still most of that margin all the way through, most of the way 5-goal margin sort of thing, and then the last quarter and a bit, Melbourne really brought it back. They kicked 4 goals to 1 in the last quarter, got within a point, and had every opportunity there late to get the win. If we have a look at some of the key areas of the match, obviously wasn't the highest scoring game, which we kind of thought was a possibility because obviously Melbourne is going into this week, was the number one defence team in the AFL in terms of scoring, so you'd kind of expect that usually when they play it's going to be a typically low scoring game. They might score okay against some teams, but yeah, they typically aren't the highest scoring matches, and that's kind of how it played out again. They did concede 11 points more than they do on average, so Carlton did well in that respect. Pretty even disposal counts for both teams. Melbourne only had 6 extra touches, but they handballed it a lot more, not a heap more, but comfortably more than Carlton did. Melbourne were plus 20 inside 50s, so that suggests that they had every opportunity to win this game. They also had 8 extra shots, so they had 23 shots to 15, but kicking 11 goals 10 from 23 shots is not a great result for them. Meanwhile, Carlton managed 12 goals from 15 shots, so that's very efficient once having a shot at goal. Clearances were pretty even. Carlton did pretty well in that. They won 42 to 40. Centre clearances was where they did their work, 14 to 10. What did we expect? Both teams aren't great at the clearances, so pretty even and going into the game, and probably wasn't too much discrepancy in the actual match. The uncontested ball was probably controlled more by Melbourne throughout the night, whereas Carlton were more so winning the contested footy. Turnovers were very high for both teams, but that's kind of understandable. It was a wet weather game, hence why also the disposal efficiency was down a lot on their averages. So that's all attributed to that. 12 contested marks from Carlton in the wet is a pretty good effort. They led from start to finish, obviously. Melbourne had 0-0 at quarter time. So they certainly didn't lead at any point until they nearly took it at the end. Tackle count obviously was high, but massively dominated by Melbourne, 86 to 68. Tackles inside 50 also dominated by Melbourne, 16 to 9. Both teams, once again, very similar in that regard in terms going into the game. So the fact that Melbourne won that, you would have thought might have been a bigger pointed towards them being victors on the day, but it wasn't to be. So that is how it is. Carlton get the win, set up in that first quarter, which kind of is a tale of a few games this weekend were set up in the first quarter. Not many of them led to a massive comeback from the other teams, but Melbourne are still going very well, so that's probably why you'd expect them to come back, even though they conceded the first 5 or 6 goals. For Carlton, Paddy Cripps and Sam Walsh were outstanding. They had a ton of it. They played very, very well. For Melbourne, Petrarca played as a forward most of the way. He had 20 touches and 5 goals. He did everything he could to get Melbourne back in this game and over the line, but he couldn't quite get there. But he played his best game of the season. Max Gawn continued his great form. Carlton are looking good. They get back on the winners list. They probably needed that win, and they got it, especially because this weekend they head up to Sydney for a massive game at the SCG against the Swans, who have shown no weaknesses since they lost to Richmond, really. Melbourne next week, they head over to Perth for a game against West Coast, which you would expect that they should be able to get the win, but we'll see how that goes for them. So that was game 1, Thursday night footy. Carlton back on the winners list. Game 2 was the first of 2 games on Friday night. We headed down the highway to Geelong for a Geelong versus Port Adelaide. What did we expect? Geelong went into this as favourites, being second on the ladder. Port Adelaide 7th on the ladder. And kind of like the Thursday night game, was blown wide open in the first quarter. Port Adelaide kicked 8 goals, 2 to 3-3 at quarter time. So if you concede 8 goals in the first quarter, you know you're going to be up against it for the rest of the match. In fact, the first half didn't get any. The second quarter didn't get any better for Geelong either. They were down 12 goals to 5 at half time, 39-point margin, and at most of the time you see that and you probably think that game's over. Was Geelong in Geelong though, and they came right back into it. They kicked 6 goals in the third quarter and then 3 in the last, to only lose by 6 points. A bit of a controversial finish with advantage not being paid, and Jeremy Cameron would have kicked a goal, and the ball went back to Ollie Henry and he missed. So that was disappointing for them, but if there was another 2 seconds on the clock, Port Adelaide would have kicked another goal in this game. So as it is, I think Port Adelaide led the whole way and probably deserved the win in that regard. Looking at the stats, Port Adelaide dominated possession. They typically have a very high kick to handball ratio, and this was no exception to that. They were actually slightly above their average, whereas Melbourne was slightly below. Inside 50s were very even, 53 to 52, which, yeah, it's about right. Geelong, as you can see, going into this game, had an equal inside 50 differential count, whereas Port Adelaide were the best team in the competition. So the fact that Geelong beat them in that regard is a probably pretty good effort from them. Even amount of shots, really. A lot of stats were very even outside of clearances, which Port Adelaide dominated that area too. They were +9, which, once again, looking at the stats going into the game, you kind of expected that, with Port Adelaide being 3rd in the league and Geelong 17th at the clearance differential game. What else is noteworthy from this game? Probably not a huge amount. I mean, obviously Port Adelaide led from start to finish, which is a huge effort down at Geelong for them. And is it the end of the world for Geelong? Not really. It's 2 losses in a row, which is concerning in a way, but they still have set themselves up for a very good season. They're 7-2 now. You expect to see them keep chugging along. From Port Adelaide, it's exactly what we kind of needed to see, because they get the label of flat track bullies a fair bit, which might be true, might not be, but they sneaked this one. Well, it's not sneak. They got the win in this one, which kind of gets that little persona off them a little bit for now. Gets them to 6-2, which is huge for them. 6-2? No, that's... How many games have we played? We've played 9, haven't we? So they must be... Are they 6-3, or I've got those numbers wrong there? What have I done there? That's poor form from me, apparently. Yeah, gets them to 6-3, which is what I thought. So I was missing a loss on their sheet last week, apparently. So they're back in it. They're in the hunt. And that was a big result for them. Best players, Willie Rioli kicked 4. He blew the game open in that first quarter, was very good. Wines was massive, Butters was massive again. They're both having outstanding seasons, especially Butters. For Geelong, Zach Guthrie, for the second week in a row, I think, was probably Geelong's best player. He was very good. Tyson Stengel kicked 4 goals. He was good. Max Holmes. But overall, Port Adelaide get the win. They were probably the better team on the night overall, and their season is has a bit of life, and we'll see how that continues to go for them. There was a second game on Friday over in the West. Fremantle hosting Sydney. Obviously a very tough day for the Fremantle Football Club and all their players, as well as GWS and their players. with the sad news that broke on that day, and it was always going to be a tough ask for Fremantle to front up and perform at their best with a lot of their players' minds elsewhere. They came out, they played pretty well, but in the end, their poor kicking in front of goal cost them. They lost this, in the end, by a decent margin. But going forward, I would not read too much into this result for them. They, their minds were definitely not in the best spot for the game. For a game of football, there's a lot more important things in life than football at times, and maybe this was one of those times where that was shown. Sydney dominant. They kicked 9 goals to 1 in the first half. Granted, it was 1 goal 8 for Fremantle. They just kept missing. Didn't matter where they shot from. Some easy ones, some tough ones. They just could not kick it through the goals. Meanwhile, Sydney just couldn't miss. It took them well into the third quarter before they had their first miss of the day. Second half, the inaccuracy kind of hit Sydney as well. They kicked 4 goals 9 in the second half. But, they're comfortable victors. 13 goals 9, 87 to 4, 15, 39. Did we expect that kind of scoreline? Probably. Being that Sydney's the best offence and third best defence, and Fremantle's the second best defence, so you kind of don't expect too high scoring. Obviously, Sydney only conceding 39 here all of a sudden helps them in that regard. Fremantle were obviously well below their average for scoring. Sydney was slightly down on theirs, but you can attribute that to Fremantle's being one of the better teams at not conceding. That's how we saw that one. A look into the stats of the match. Probably not too dissimilar for both teams. Interesting to note that Sydney were a very high kick team this week, way above their average. They're usually 1.58 kicks per handball. This week they were at over 2, which is quite big. Meanwhile, Fremantle, who are the most handball-y team in the competition, were even lower than their normal average, only 1.11. So completely different game styles for both teams, which led to only 5 plus 5 in inside 50s for Sydney, which isn't a huge number. It's a decent number, don't get me wrong, but when you look at this game, it's kind of expected because Sydney are a high inside 50 differential team. They're third in the competition, whereas Fremantle are 14th at minus 1.25. So to get within 5 is probably a good sign for Freo there. And from that, they created an extra couple shots than Sydney. But just the fact that they just couldn't convert was the major issue for them. Pretty even from the clearance, 28 to 27 in favour of Fremantle, which probably expected. Fremantle are one of the best clearance teams, if not the best clearance team, and Sydney are not far behind them. They have some absolute guns in the middle. Obviously, with Sydney kicking it so much, they did mark it a lot more than Freo. They had an extra 60 kicks than Fremantle did for the game, so that's kind of understandable that they would win the mark count. Tackle count was only just won by Seattle. Only just. They were plus 10. That's quite a decent margin, I guess. Which both teams are typically very good tacklers. So another crucial thing there for Sydney to win was tackle count probably, and they got that. Sarong continued his great form. He's had a great season. He's been very, very good most of the season. You can pretty much put a line through a lot of these players, whether they were good or not. It's a situation that you don't want anyone to ever have to go through on any day, let alone a game day, and then have to front up in front of half of Australia and play a game of football. But that's what they did, and in the end, they weren't good enough on the night. Sydney, they went over there, they got the job done. They're flying along. Will Hayward kicked 4 goals again, so that's 2 weeks in a row. He's kicked a bag. He's been very good. Jake Lloyd, I gave best on ground. He was great. Florence, Warner, Heaney, Goulden, all their big names as per usual. All very, very good. So that was our Friday night footy complete out west. We move on to Saturday's first game down in Launceston at Utah Stadium. Hawthorn's St Kilda. Obviously both teams struggling coming in. Hawthorn had won the week before though, so against the Doggies, so their confidence was up a little bit. St Kilda are spiralling quickly. I don't know what's going on up there, but yeah, things are not looking great for them. Hawthorn kicked away, not massively, but led pretty much most of the day. In fact, at no point of this match did St Kilda lead, so it's a sign of Hawthorn being the, I don't know about the fair winners, but definitely they led the whole way. So they win 8-10, 58 to 7-11, 53. Both had 18 scoring shots, but inaccuracy led the way for Hawthorn to get the win. Disposal count very similar. St Kilda did kick the ball more than they usually do, which, I mean, is a good sign, bad sign, don't know, but that's just a fact of the game. St Kilda were also +8 inside 50, so this is another team this weekend. We've already seen a couple that have won the inside 50 count and lost. St Kilda had an extra 2 shots as well, so like a lot of these things make you think that St Kilda probably should have or would have won. But at the end of the day, Hawthorn did what they needed to do and they get the win. Clearances weren't too far apart, 38 to 34 in St Kilda's favour. Contested ball, very similar. Uncontested, not too dissimilar. Turnovers, not too dissimilar there either for the two teams. St Kilda had a massive amount of marks, 117 to 76, which would suggest to you that they controlled the game a bit better, but then they didn't move it forward well enough or convert. So maybe they just were wasting kicks and marks. I don't know. Tackle count, St Kilda won that as well. They were +7 in tackles this week, which I think I did note last week that it was going to be interesting to see how the tackles went, being that the two teams are 16th and 18th in tackle differential. High tackling game, 77 to 84, but St Kilda just got over in that with +7, which is certainly better than they usually do, but it didn't lead to much for them because obviously they still lost. Lloyd Meek for Hawthorn, I think he was fantastic. He was huge. Both ruckmen played very well actually. Rowan Marshall was very good as well. They both had a lot of it. They both competed very well. Jordan Newcomb was very good. Carl Amon got a lot of it. Got a lot of metres gained. He was good. Just across the board, Hawthorn, a lot of players that probably outperformed what they usually do, and they got the reward for it. St Kilda, they struggled outside of their top few. Jack Steele was very good, as I said. Rowan Marshall was good. Josh Battle was good. But then, they had a few players that maybe underperformed, but that's football really. Looking forward, Hawthorn, all of a sudden they've got 3 wins, 6 losses, which going into the season, and even after probably the first couple of weeks, if you had told them they would be 3 and 6, I'm not 100% sure they would be convinced that that was going to be the truth, but they've turned their season around a little bit. I still think they've got a long way to go before they're really looking good, but at the same time, positive signs for the Hawks. They had a few good positive signs late last year where they won a couple games. They're doing that a bit earlier this year, so I can't see them competing for finals, but at least they're showing something the last couple of weeks especially. they got a tough assignment next week, going over to Adelaide to play Port Adelaide. Meanwhile, St Kilda's season is not terrible, but it's certainly not looking in good shape. They're sitting 14th on the ladder. They're 3 and 6 as well as Hawthorn, and they host Fremantle at Marvel Stadium, and you've got to think that this is pretty much a must-win for them. 6 losses in a season. Well, if you want to play finals, you probably need to win 13 games. 12, but definitely 13. Which means they need another 10 wins from 15 games. So they need to go 10 and 5. So they need to start winning games, and they need to win concurrent games. But at the moment, I just don't think they look good enough either to be a genuine finals footy team anyway. 13th best going into this game for points for, and 8th for points against. Suggests that they don't score enough. They probably don't keep teams quiet enough, but obviously a very low scoring game, this one. It wasn't the most entertaining game, but that's football. Some games are like that, and in the end, Hawthorn get the win, and that's the main thing for them. St Kilda, they cop a loss, and they have to try and turn their season around before it gets too late. Saturday afternoon after that one, evening game was at Marvel Stadium, Essendon v GWS. Obviously 5th and 3rd going into this week. I went over for this game and a couple others. This is the first one that I watched. And it was a entertaining game. It was good. Obviously Essendon got the win, 82-62, which jumps them up into the top 4. Their season's flying along. Life's all good for the Bombers. Meanwhile, Giants, they've had a tough 3 or 4 weeks. Obviously, they did have a tough couple days leading into this, but their season, I think they were 5-0. They're now 6-3, so things have fallen apart a little bit. It's not the end of the world for them. They had a solid start to the year, so they're still at their best a very good team. This game, GWS led for more of the game than Essendon did, which is kind of surprising, but maybe not, because they were leading by 2 goals at half time. But Essendon did lead for most of the second half. They turned it on in the third quarter, kicking 5 goals to 2, and then in the final quarter they just continued that on, kicking 3 goals to 1. A 20-point win is huge for Essendon in this one. Interesting stats. Essendon were plus 27 in disposals, so had a decent amount more of the ball. They were about their normal kick to handball ratio. Both of these teams tend to like to handball quite a bit. GWS definitely, probably, in my opinion, handballed it a bit too much this game. But that's neither here nor there. Plus 17 inside 50s for Essendon is a sign of how much of the territory battle they dominated. Obviously, both teams being pretty high on the ladder do tend to do pretty well in the inside 50 count. Essendon showed their dominance there. They definitely controlled a fair chunk of this game in terms of ground position. 25 shots to 20 in Essendon's favour. Another stat that tends to lead you to think that Essendon were probably on top. Clearance count was very similar. Both teams were very close in that, which is a little surprising because Bombers tend to do better than what GWS historically have done this season. Uncontested ball was very similar. Same with contested, wasn't too far apart. Turnovers was probably a crucial part of this game. GWS turned it over a bit more, whereas Essendon controlled the play a bit. 113 marks to 74 shows that they kind of controlled it. They played well in terms of controlling it, but also knowing when to kind of release the trigger and go for it. So they'll be pretty happy with that. GWS, they definitely have things to work on from this game. Will they be able to turn it around going into this weekend? Who knows? But they do have a big game. They return to NG Stadium, their home ground, for the first time in about 6 weeks that they've played there, to host the Bulldogs. Meanwhile, Essendon just have come into a little bit of a, I'm reluctant to say easy run because it's harsh on some teams, but they certainly have a run of the lower ranked teams. Led off this Sunday, they play North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium, which, if you've been watching North Melbourne, there's not a person in the world that could tip North to win this. So there's a very good chance that by round 11 or 12, Essendon will be top 2, and you'd expect them to probably stay there for the next 5 or so weeks because they don't have the toughest run. And they might be able to put a little bit of breathing space on the rest of the ladder. A lot of good players for both. Well, mainly Essendon, but Tom Green was good for GWS. Pretty much everyone from Essendon's played pretty well. Langford kicked 4. He's continued his great season. He's been very good. The midfielders, Nick Martin, Bombers were just the better team on the day, and they got the job done. Meanwhile, GWS have lost twice at Marvel Stadium in the last month, and they've lost 3 out of their last 4, so they need to start trying to resurrect their season a bit with that. It's not the end of the world. They're still 6-3. They're still right up there on the ladder. They've got plenty of positives, but yeah, their last month just has been a little bit down, so they'll be wanting to try and turn that around as quickly as possible. Game number 6 was, I haven't finished rewatching this, so or watching it in full. I've haven't done the player ratings from this game on because I was away in Melbourne, and I've been trying to catch up on it, but I've got to finish watching this game and do the ratings. But it's a tough game to watch, let's be honest. Gold Coast, North Melbourne, up in Darwin. I didn't have much hopes for North in this, and I don't think anybody really did because they're having a terrible season and they lived up to kind of expectations. Gold Coast, they moved to 5-4, which is a good record. Those 5 wins were all against lower ranked teams. I don't think anyone they've beat is in the 8s. So we've still got to wait and see if they can actually start beating some of the top teams, or even some of the middle teams, in my opinion. But they did what they had to do on the weekend. They won absolutely convincingly, 120-52. So once again, North Melbourne conceded a massive score. Their average against is 120.6, which is about 20 points worse than any other team. And they conceded 120 again here. Interesting to note that their goal kicking wasn't fantastic this week, North Melbourne. That's kind of what allows them to score semi-decently. When I say semi-decently, they're still 17th at that in the league. But if they didn't kick straight, that'd be a lot worse. But this week, 7 goals 10 was not a fantastic showing from them in front of goals. Meanwhile, Gold Coast kicked 17-18, so they had plenty of forward pressure and scoreboard pressure on them right from the get-go, basically. Gold Coast kicked 5 goals 12 in the first half, so they could have been a lot further in front. And then in the second half, they kind of kicked a lot straighter, kicked 12 goals 6 to give them a comfortable victory in the end. Interesting to note that North Melbourne had more of the ball than Gold Coast, as in terms of disposals at least. But Gold Coast plus 22 in inside 50s, which you'd expect that they would win the inside 50s, but plus 22 is a pretty big margin. Plus 17 shots, plus 20 hit outs, plus 9 clearances. They won one contested ball, but lost uncontested ball. High turnover game, which isn't that surprising. Most games in Darwin tend to be a little bit more on the high turnover count. But Gold Coast controlled most of the game, most of the way through. Plus 22 tackles as well for them, so pretty much every major stat Gold Coast won. North Melbourne just kind of don't look like they're in the same league at the moment. Having a very tough season, and right now where their first win comes from is anybody's guess. They get a chance against West Coast in a few weeks. Otherwise, they're just going to kind of be relying on someone not showing up one day and they just playing out of their skin, because at the moment it's hard to see where that win's coming from. Looking ahead to next week, North Melbourne, as I've mentioned before, are playing Essendon at Marvel Stadium, whereas Gold Coast get a little bit of limelight time back up in Darwin for the second week in a row. On Thursday night footy, they're playing Geelong. So this is their chance to beat a team that's above them and like firmly in the 8. Geelong coming off a couple losses in a row, they'll be wanting to turn that around, but are they vulnerable? We'll see, but we need to see Gold Coast actually starting to beat some good teams before we are convinced they are ready to play finals footy. Obviously they're 10th on the ladder at the moment, so they're not really in the 8, but they're not that far off. They're 5 and 4, so they're above 50%, so they could get there, but yeah, as I said, they need to start winning some of these games. Can't like the one coming up this weekend if they want to have a real chance at that. And then they travel down to Melbourne to play Carlton, so a couple really big weeks for Gold Coast. If they want to play finals, they need to win at least one of those two, in my opinion. The other Saturday night game was the second game I went to of football on the weekend. It was Richmond Bulldogs at the MCG, and boy, oh boy, was this a flogging. Biggest margin of the year so far, I'm pretty sure. Bulldogs won at 120. No, that's the wrong score line. 133 to 42. At no point was this a competitive game. Bulldogs kicked 3-6 to 0-1 in the first quarter. Kicked 6 goals 7 to 3-1 in the second quarter. They won the third quarter by 19 points. They won the final quarter by 25 points. And I think Richmond kicked the last 2 goals to get it under 100. But 91-point flogging. It was a tough watch. If you're a Richmond fan, it was a tough watch. The only people that probably really enjoyed it were the Bulldogs fans, who have had a tough little period of their team going up and down. Maybe this is another case of them just hitting a high. As I've said, Bulldogs' best is up there with top 4 teams in the league. Unfortunately, their worst, which kind of shows up too often, is not anywhere near top 8. So we can look at the stats, but I mean, the scoreline tells you everything you need to know. Bulldogs had all of the ball. Richmond had none of it. Inside 50s, 77 for the Bulldogs. That is a massive, massive number of inside 50s. Plus 36 is insane. They had 41 shots to 12 for the match. That is an insane discrepancy. Plus 9 in clearances, which isn't huge numbers, but I mean it's good enough. Turnovers was obviously on Bulldogs' side as well. They marked a lot. They did everything a lot. But how the hell did they have 16 disposals more than Richmond and still win the tackle count by 9? Like, what is going on? I know Richmond are injury depleted and they had a few players out there that clearly were not travelling too well in terms of fitness by the end of the game, so I'm guessing A couple injuries may have happened throughout the day. Bolter was really struggling to get around the ground from my viewpoint. But boy, oh boy, is that a bad number for them. -9 tackles and -126 disposals. The other team had the ball on a string, and you still couldn't tackle. Anyway, that's football. Everyone was good for the Bulldogs. Just put a line in them all. They were all great. Richmond, I don't know if they had anyone that was really great or even worth mentioning. She was a tough day at the office for them, but it's not going to get any easier in the coming weeks. They will start to get players back, but the damage on their season is well and truly done. As we've mentioned, Bulldogs are going to GWS on this weekend, so it'll be a big game for them because it's going to be tough. They've been penciled in as a team that goes up and down week on, week out, but which would suggest that this is a down week and it's also against a very good team. But hopefully for the Bulldogs' sake, they can come out and perform a little bit better. They can be competitive in this. If they do go down, they want to at least show that they were in the fight. Richmond, they head up to the Gabba to play Brisbane, and it's hard to see a world where they win that one based on what we've seen, especially last week, but over the last month or so. Sunday football headed to a Marvel Stadium. We had Collingwood v West Coast. This was the third and final game I went to on the weekend, and it probably went as most people expected. I know West Coast had beat Collingwood last time at Marvel, but they're just two teams in two completely different areas at the moment. Like, Collingwood are obviously reigning premiers. West Coast are a team that's certainly rebuilding a lot. They're showing some good signs though. But this day was probably not one of them. Collingwood dominated most areas of the game, specifically in the first half. The game kind of changed a little bit in the second half. Collingwood had quite a few injuries. West Coast had a couple as well. And the game slowed down a fair bit, and that kind of led to a lot less scoring in the second half, and therefore not so much of a margin. But 7-2 second quarter was where this game really blew open. Collingwood led 74-19 at half time. Then they didn't even concede a goal in the third quarter, so by three-quarter time they're 14 goals to 3, and this game was well and truly in the books. Collingwood had a lot of different players, especially in the forward line, with a few injuries before the game, and then Jeremy House started in the forward line. He was subbed out at quarter time. So a little bit of a different look forward for Collingwood, and it kind of worked, but was it good playing, or was it good game style, or was it just the fact that West Coast weren't up to the level that they needed to be? Inside 50 count was 59-34, so pretty dominant there for Collingwood. Plus 17 shots for Collingwood as well, so pretty much most areas of the game they just controlled. Plus 9 clearances, more contested ball, more uncontested ball, less turnovers, more marks. Outside of West Coast kicking the first goal, which was their highlight of the day probably, pretty much every facet of this game was just controlled by Collingwood. Best players, Nick Dacos continued his fine season. He had a lot of the ball kicked a goal. Crisp was good for Collingwood. Joe Richards on debut was very good. You could reel off another 10 Collingwood players that were really, really good for West Coast. They showed sparks. Harley Reid took a screamer. Go check that out. It was a very good mark. They kicked some good goals. They weren't disgraceful, but it's always a tough ask for them coming to Marvel to play against a team that should beat them, and that is what happened. We have one final game to look at from the weekend, and it was Adelaide Oval It was Adelaide v Brisbane, Sunday afternoon/evening game. Adelaide, well, both teams actually going into this 3-5. They both started the season poorly, kind of have resurrected it a little bit and making it look like the season's going to be okay. And then all of a sudden, what happens? They get a draw. Second draw we've had in the AFL in the last few weeks. Obviously after the Anzac Day draw. I think I went into this saying whoever loses this match, their season's not over, but pretty much over. I don't know what a draw means for either of them, to be honest. They're not done, but they're not helping their season too much. At least that's how I see it. Adelaide, well, I don't know. Both teams kind of had similar disposal numbers. Adelaide were a lot more handball orientated, whereas Brisbane were not, which Brisbane never are. They're number one kick to handball ratio in terms of more kicks than handballs in the league. Adelaide were long way below what they normally are. They usually run at about 1.5. They were 1.18. So was that because Brisbane forced them into it? Not 100% convinced on that, but for whatever reason they did handball it more than their typical game. Brisbane were also +8 inside 50s, which they're always really good at the inside 50 count, and they have been all year. They spent most of the first 7 rounds sitting that first position in inside 50 count, whereas they've dropped to second, but they continued that. Clearances were won by Adelaide, so they were getting the clearances but turning it over way too much, and Brisbane would bounce and get it inside 50. Shot count was similar. Both teams, a lot of areas were similar in terms of at least number-wise. I think, major difference in this game was just the difference in game style. Obviously, Brisbane being a kick-mark team, Adelaide more so than normal not being a kick-mark team. They were handballing a lot. In the end, ends in a draw. Both teams obviously probably think they could have won this one. I mean, obviously, when there's a draw, you probably had your chances. Who's happier with a draw? I don't think either, to be honest. It feels a lot different than the Collingwood-Essendon draw, in my opinion, but I could be wrong on that. I just feel like Collingwood and Essendon have a little bit more positives come out of their draw than these two. Adelaide, obviously, another game at Adelaide Oval they haven't won. If I was to look at their whole season, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, have they won a game at Adelaide Oval outside of the showdown? I'm not 100% sure on that. Let me just get their season up. So I know they lost their first one against Geelong. They then lost to Melbourne over there. They then lost to Essendon over there. They then beat Port Adelaide. So, and now they've drawn. So they've only won one game at Adelaide Oval this year, and we're 9 rounds in, and that was against Port Adelaide, where they don't have a home ground advantage. So make it make sense for me, but that's where their season's at. Brisbane have also struggled kind of at home, but the fact that they were on the road here, they get 2 points. Their season still has a sniff of life, but they certainly need to turn it around before things get too messy for them. Yes, so that was the final game of the week. As I said, couple close games, couple really close games, and a couple blowouts. So a bit of an up and down weekend of football, really. We had, Carlton by a point, Port Adelaide by 6 points. Sydney by 48. Hawthorn by 5. Essendon by 20. Western Bulldogs by 91. Gold Coast by 68. Collingwood by 66. And then the final game, Adelaide-Brisbane, was a draw. That is all the matches from round 9. We'll be back to preview round 10 on Wednesday night. Not going to lie, it's not the most interesting round on paper of all time. We lead off on Thursday night with Gold Coast Geelong. Friday night we have Sydney Carlton, which is probably match of the round. Saturday we have Collingwood Adelaide and Giants v Bulldogs, which could be an okay game if the right Bulldogs turn up. St Kilda Fremantle on Saturday night alongside Brisbane and Richmond. And then Sunday we finish the weekend with Essendon North Melbourne, Port Adelaide versus Hawthorn, and West Coast v Melbourne. That's the end of this episode. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, tell me what your team's doing. Are you happy with how they're going? Are you not? Let me know. Don't forget to follow me on all my socials. And once again, thanks for tuning in. I'll be back on Wednesday. Thanks.